Good afternoon. This is Taylor Hudson, joined by Hugh McNaughton. Thanks for being with us today to do the Sprague Market Brief. It's November 8th, 2012. So today, Hugh and I wanted to follow up on the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy and what we're seeing going on in the market. So we'll start with three big topics affecting our marketing area: refineries, what's going on the Gulf Coast, and the Jones Act, and an update broadly on some terminals. So Hugh, why don't you fill us in?
Okay, just on those on the refinery, U.S. East Coast refinery issue, Taylor. All along, Sandy was going to have more of a negative impact on demand than a negative impact on supply, meaning that Sandy struck an area which is basically a petroleum consuming area rather than a producing area, unlike the hurricanes in the Gulf Coast. As a result, the one big question that was left was the impact that Sandy would have on the East Coast refinery capacity. The bottom line is that of 1.2 million barrels worth of U.S. East Coast refineries, only at this point, only 330 approximately thousand barrels remain still non-operational. They are Bayway's Phillips 66 Big Bayway refinery at 240,000 barrels, and a smaller Hess refinery in Port Reading, New Jersey at 70,000 barrels. The bottom line, though, is as small as those two are, and they amount to 300, just a little over 300,000 barrels, obviously, worth of refining capacity. They are a significant producer of some of the region's requirements. They represent an ability to produce 180,000 barrels a day of gasoline and 90,000 barrels a day of distillates, which obviously are, since both of those refineries are out for the next several weeks, potentially going to represent an important contributor to the area's supply. All right, we were going to talk about the Jones Act.
One question before we do. Other major sources of supply into the Northeast, number one being Colonial Pipeline. Is the Colonial Pipeline up and running and fully functional into delivery into Linden, New Jersey, Hugh?
Yes, it is now back on tap to its Linden terminal in New Jersey.
And then also, obviously, imports could be a major source of supply. We'll talk about that with the Gulf Coast and Jones Act, but I know for a while there, New York Harbor barge traffic was shut down due to debris. There was a small oil spill. All of that cleaned up, Hugh, and traffic in the harbor sort of returning to normal.
Yes, yes, it is. Essentially, I think all of those temporary constraints have been resolved. So the next item then is something that could be a major source of help on rebuilding U.S. East Coast inventories. Is the Jones Act repeal, a 98-year old and in many people's opinion outmoded measure to protect U.S. flag shipping and U.S. merchant marine, but we won't go anywhere into that controversial issue. Suffice to say that Senator John McCain tried to repeal that in 2009, I think, or 10, maybe it was 10, and failed. So, I mean, when you've got a good conservative, obviously Republican senator, clearly not in favor of this particular measure, then I mean that's something to be taken seriously.
So just for everybody's consumption here, the Jones Act, waiving the Jones Act temporarily, will allow more ships to bring plentiful Gulf Coast supply up into New York Harbor potentially. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that is by far and away the biggest contributor that waiving the Jones Act, albeit temporarily, will have.
Because there's just so much that we can shove on the pipe, and it's full already. So this will allow more to come up.
Exactly. It also, by the way, would allow more to come up at substantially lower cost than if it had to come on U.S. flag vessels, assuming there were enough of them to make a difference.
Do you have any actual news reports yet of ships being chartered for this purpose?
Yes, there are. There are reports that there have been a significant deviation of vessels that would otherwise have been heading, for example, to up into eastern Canada, out of the Gulf Coast, also transatlantic, that have been moved. Maybe as much as 4 or 5 vessels already, which would appear to be then over 1 million barrels, and potentially double that by the time the full measure of this repeal is taken advantage of.
How long of a transit time are we looking at? I mean, when could we hopefully see the impact of these vessels arriving in New York Harbor?
It's a 5 to 6 day transit time from, let's say, from Houston to New York. A lot of these vessels are already en route to, say, Canada or other foreign locations, and just a question of function then of being diverted here and already maybe, or here within 2 or 3 days.
How about terminals? We know that we had quite a few terminals that were impacted by Sandy. Are they getting back up online and running? What's the status of those?
Well, the DOE, or there are, 57 major terminals, not necessarily all, several, 100,000 barrel capacity type terminals, but major ones that could have been or might have been affected by tropical storm or Hurricane Sandy. I beg your pardon. Of that, there are only now 8 that are still down. And of those, really only the bigger ones worth mentioning are Sunoco's very large Newark terminal, Motiva's Lawrence, that's Lawrence, New York, and Motiva's Brooklyn terminals, and Metro Brooklyn. And of course, still a number of smaller terminals out on Long Island and in central and northern New Jersey that are having operational issues. But the terminals, to a very substantial extent, are really back in operation. They shouldn't be a significant constraint going forward here.
So we have a period of time here where people are finding alternative products in different locations, might have some temporary dislocations. Out of those terminals that you mentioned, any of them, I guess the ones that you mentioned, could be several weeks, if you will?
The Sunoco terminal particularly, Taylor.
Okay, actually, let's jump back real quick here. Bayway and then Port Reading. What's the time frame for those both to be up and running?
I think what we've heard is really several weeks, and I mean, I personally construe that to be 2 to 3 weeks. One of the ConocoPhillips personnel that we deal with, or I actually deal with on the aviation side, said that there was substantial electrical rehabilitation to be done because of the flooding by seawater and its corrosive influence. But he was sort of indicating that maybe something like, end November, maybe first half December, could see Bayway coming back, at least partially.
Let's jump to the next slides now. Let's talk about some of the DOE numbers that have come in and where we stand as of yesterday's report. Obviously, the hurricane, the numbers we got this week were as of last Friday. And if the storm struck last Monday into Tuesday and things were down for a few days afterwards, I think you and I both agree that this next week's report will probably be more telling. But the first chart here we have is total gasoline stocks in the New York Harbor area at just under 23 million barrels. I was talking to you before we came in that when you look at the EIA's website and you look at these inventories, this actually happens to be one of the lowest levels that we've ever had of total gasoline stocks in New York Harbor. So certainly we're seeing that in some of the cash values for gasoline in the harbor and some of the dislocations and people jumping around for product. So this may get worse. If we go to total distillate stocks in New York Harbor, so this is ultra-low sulfur and high sulfur. This is a chart that we showed back in early October when we were, so a little over a month ago, and we were talking about how we were entering the heating season with one of the lowest levels of distillate inventories in New York Harbor that we've ever seen. Funny things happened since we had that discussion. We got kind of worked up and we started to talk about, if we got similar weather and conditions, we could, see inventory levels easily achieve where they were in the end of the winter of 2000 and the end of winter 2003, and what that would mean for basis. And through the month of October, total distillate inventories in New York Harbor basically flatlined. So the update to this chart is that just like at the beginning of October, at the beginning of November, we have about 20.5 million barrels of a combined high sulfur and low sulfur distillate pool in the New York Harbor area. I would guess, given the cash strength that we've seen this last week, and maybe you disagree, but I would assume that we're going to start to get some draws here, but we haven't seen them yet.
Absolutely no disagreement here. With considering the steady escalation, and maybe that's an understatement in what we've seen, particularly with regard to the ULS, the ultra low sulfur stock values, or costs rather. No, I'm sure we'll see the same thing.
So we'll also talk briefly about this price spread between ultra low sulfur diesel in New York Harbor and high sulfur heating oil in New York Harbor. This is a chart we've been following for quite some time, and as you can see here, over the past week and a half since the storm, ultra low sulfur diesel in New York Harbor has really gained in value relative to the high sulfur, its high sulfur counterpart. And we now have a price spread between the two products that's the highest it's ever been, somewhere around 20 cents. Now these are cash market estimate values, so I'm sure somebody could argue with our numbers, but no one can argue with the fact that this spread is wide, and it's the widest it's been. Without the storm, maybe we would have been around a normal 5 or 6 cents. That was an ongoing bet that you and I had, but hard to say. But now we've had the storm, and there's definitely a crunch for ultra low sulfur diesel in New York Harbor. So finally, at the end of the day, I want to talk too about some news stories that have come out recently about waivers and loans. Over to you, Hugh.
The New Jersey and New York State, and for that matter, federal EPA have taken some steps to reduce the pressure on that. Well, clearly that very sharp indication of tightening ULS, that's ultra low sulfur diesel and heating oil stocks and costs for that matter. There have been some waivers related to the substitution of higher sulfur fuels for generators and some transportation, but generally on a very limited basis, only in the areas affected by, I think, by the impact of the storm. Whereas, of course, in the case of New York, you have all the rest of New York State, all 18 or 20 million, whatever it is, population that is not affected by the waiver. The federal government has made a relatively small, I guess, a loan of 2 million gallons, which is about 50,000 barrels of ultra low sulfur diesel out of the Northeast Regional SPR, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, to the National Guard, is it, and to some other National Guard and maybe FEMA personnel for use in relief efforts. But considering that there's a million barrels of total reserves on hand, 50,000 barrels isn't going to go very far. Maybe a million wouldn't, but it certainly would help.
So to wrap up, I think we'll just leave it with we hope that we've been through the worst of it so far. We hope that the waiver of the Jones Act will bring some incremental barrels in. We also hope that these refineries and terminals will be back up and running soon. And I think it goes without saying that everyone here at Sprague is concerned about our customers in the affected areas, as well as our employees and staff, and we wish them the best in recovering from this disaster. With that, we leave you. Please let us know what you like and dislike anytime. Thank you. Bye.